How does one kind of confusing story about a commerce secretary and some tariffs blow up into a whole conversation about a full-blown crisis of trust in, well, everything? In this breakdown, we are going to dissect a huge 2-hour conversation between Joe Rogan and Dave Smith. We're going to trace the threads that connect high finance, foreign policy, and the media. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so this whole thing kicks off with a really tangled story. An accusation against the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. It's a whole thing involving his old company, tariffs, and this potential trade that, when you first hear about it, it just sounds a little too convenient. So let's try and unpack what was actually said. And this is where it really gets interesting. So on one side, you have the accusation. Lutnick's old firm was supposedly buying up these tariff refund rights for just pennies on the dollar. I mean, they were setting themselves up for a massive payday if those tariffs got overturned. But then the company comes back and says, well, hold on, we only looked into it. We never actually did it because of, political optics. So which side do you even believe?
So was there some big smoking gun? Not really, no. But honestly, that's not even the point. The real takeaway from this whole confusing mess is that it shines a light on a much bigger problem. Even if these kinds of deals are, technically legal, they just feel kind of slimy, right? And it's that feeling that just slowly chips away at our trust in our leaders.
And that feeling, that's the perfect jump-off point for our next section. Because this whole thing isn't just about one guy or one deal. It's about what feels like a whole system of influence and self-dealing that seems to pop up pretty much everywhere you look. And then, right in the middle of it all, Rogan just drops this question. Is there anywhere that's not corrupt? And just like that, boom, the whole conversation shifted. It wasn't about the tiny details of one deal anymore. It was about the entire system. Is corruption just a one-off thing, or has it actually become the rule?
That one question just opened the floodgates. All of a sudden, the conversation was just this laundry list of other examples. You had congressional insider trading, these shady deals with NGOs, even Jared Kushner's business stuff. The picture they were painting was pretty grim. It really felt like, the wolves have taken over the henhouse.
Okay, now this is where things get really, really serious. The conversation didn't just stick to corruption here at home. It made this direct and honestly kind of chilling connection between this system of self-interest and what America does out on the world stage. In other words, these problems we have internally, they have massive and potentially deadly consequences for everyone else.
So take the push for a potential war with Iran, for instance. The argument being made wasn't that this was about national security. Nope. Instead, they framed it as a pet project for really powerful donors and foreign interests, people who have the direct line to American politicians.
And the numbers they brought up really seemed to highlight this huge disconnect. The poll they were looking at showed this massive gap between the politicians and the actual American people. Yeah, sure, Republicans were mostly for military action, but a huge majority of Democrats and independents were totally against it. So you have to ask, who are our leaders really listening to?
And the price tag for this potential war? Well, one commentator they mentioned apparently requested a staggering $200 billion. I mean, just let that number sink in. It is an absolutely mind-boggling amount of money, and it really puts what's at stake here into perspective.
The discussion also really honed in on one particular figure, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Dave Smith basically argued that this push for conflict isn't some new thing. It's something Netanyahu has been advocating for decades. This completely reframes the potential war, not as an American idea, but as the end goal of one man's lifelong ambition.
Okay, so then they brought up this really fascinating and, pretty controversial idea they called suicidal empathy. The term comes from a guy named Gad Saad, and it's this theory that Western societies are so driven by this sense of guilt that they end up making policies, everything from open borders to foreign wars, that could actually wind up hurting themselves. It's a pretty provocative idea, and it definitely added a lot of fuel to the fire of the conversation.
So you've got this system of distrust, you've got these potentially disastrous consequences in foreign policy, but how does anybody find out about it? Well, that brings us to the final big theme, the narrative battleground. The fight for who actually gets to tell the story. And I mean, what's a better example of just shattering a narrative than this quote from Donald Trump, when he said to Bill O'Reilly, "We got a lot of killers too. What, you think our country is so innocent?" He just completely torpedoed that traditional rah-rah America story that the corporate media usually pushes. For Rogan and Smith, this was a moment of, well, cynical, but kind of refreshing honesty.
So
What's the legacy media's big response to this collapse in trust? Well, apparently it's to just try to look like a podcast. The guys had a pretty good laugh about this, pointing out how you see these mainstream news shows with the big microphones and the casual sets now. But they argued it just totally misses the point. It's not about what you look like, it's about being authentic.
And this, right here, really gets to the heart of the media divide they were talking about. On one side, you've got the old guard, right? Corporate media, reading off teleprompters, pushing the official story, and just hemorrhaging viewers. And on the other side, you've got this new wave of independent media. It feels authentic, it's conversational, it questions everything. And, well, it's pretty clear which one is winning the trust of the audience.
So, when you take all these different pieces, the sketchy deals, the endless wars, the broken media, and you put them all together, you're really left with just one single, inescapable conclusion. We're living through a massive crisis of trust.
And this isn't just some vague feeling either. The conversation actually laid out a pretty clear, step-by-step roadmap for how trust disappears. First, it starts with one specific incident, a story that just doesn't feel right. Then, people start connecting the dots, and they see a pattern. And after that, they start to see the real-world consequences, like a war nobody wants. And then finally, they just stop believing anything the official storytellers have to say.
So what's the answer to all this? Well, according to Rogan, it's definitely not about just picking a different team. He argued that the real problem is tribalism itself. You fucked up by being in a group, he said. Republican, Democrat, MAGA, woke, whatever it is. In his view, the only real way out is to just think for yourself.
And that's really the million-dollar question this whole conversation leaves you with, isn't it? As these old systems start to break down, what comes next? Are we heading toward a world of independent thinkers? Or are we just going to shatter into a million new little tribes all at war with each other? The future's not written, but one thing seems clear. The old way is on its way out. What happens next? Well, that's up to us.